So my name is Kane, and I'm head of public programming for the Delaware Historical Society. And on behalf of the trustees and staff of the Delaware Historical Society, welcome to Race, Poverty, and Delaware Public Education, Policies, Outcomes, and Prospects. This presentation is the third Contemporary History Series program of 2017, in which we explore modern topics with a historical perspective to spark healthy discussion. Please see our informational table at the back with materials on DHS's upcoming programs and teacher workshops, as well as information on how to become a DHS member for further perks. Also, please take the time to fill out the evaluation that you were sitting on when you came in. That really helps us going forward with our programs. By a show of hands, how many of you in the room are educators? Wonderful. Now will you please stand up so we can recognize you with a round of applause for all of the hard work that you do. And it's great that you're all here because tonight's program is a discussion on public education in Delaware. We are pleased to have with us three experts and advocates for education in Delaware, Dr. Daniel Rich, Ms. Shauna Payne, and Mr. Darrell Green. Dr. Tony Allen was originally scheduled to participate, but he had to send his regrets earlier in the week. Dr. Rich is the University of Delaware's Director of the Community Engagement Initiative and Policy Director of the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission, in which he leads programs to enhance the community and civic engagement of faculty, staff, and students, and strengthen community partnerships in key areas of education, health, and sustainability. Dr. Rich will first present on the historical context and current issues in Delaware public education as they relate to issues of race and equity. Shauna Payne is the Delaware Department of Education Director of Higher Education, in which she serves as a liaison between the K-12 system and the higher education institutions on issues related to college access, enrollment, persistence, and affordability. Her office also oversees the administration of the $4 million plus in scholarships and coordinates the state's college investment plan. And that is also located at our back table, so please make sure that you all go back and get a copy. Mr. Darrell Green is the Delaware Department of Education Director, Innovation and Improvement, who joined the Department of Education on August 1st, 2017, after serving in the Brandywine School District as Assistant Superintendent since 2012. Mr. Green is a longtime Delaware educator with over 18 years of experience in public education. Mr. Green is currently pursuing his doctorate in organizational leadership from Wilmington University. So after the presentation, Ms. Payne and Mr. Green will join the table and provide insight into current education policy. And after the panel, the floor is open for questions and discussion. So please join me in welcoming tonight's speakers.
Let's see if we can get this to work. Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
So we're good?
Yes.
That's good because I can't figure out how to increase the volume. So wave at me, and if I have to, I'll put on my professorial voice, which all the teachers in the audience know about. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's nice to see some familiar faces and to talk about something of great importance to all of us who are here and many who are not. So let me start by saying I am not a historian. I'm a policy person, but I believe that you can't really understand the challenges to policy or how to meet those challenges if you don't understand them in the context of history. And so we'll take a little historical tour tonight, but within policy context and with a particular framework. My good friend Tony Allen sends his regrets, but I think you'll see as we move forward, I'm going to end up and talk a little bit about what everything I've said has to do with the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission. There's some handouts, there's a couple extra here. If you didn't get one, you kind of ran out and you want any of those handouts, just contact Katie. We'll make sure she gets some more and sends them to you. But you can always go to the website for the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission. I'm going to tell you that website right now. And anything and everything we ever do okay, has been put on that website. It's www.solutionsfordelawareschools.com. Solutionsfordelawareschools.com. So any analysis, any research, any reports, that's where you can find them, you can download everything, and everything you do is public. So let me tell you about a saga. I have a saga to tell you about, and let's see if this works. Whoops. There. Tell me what I have to do here. Oh, how about that? Let's try that. Whoops, I got it now. Now it works. So this is what I want to talk to you about. So functionally, Delaware has two public education systems, or at least I think it's worth thinking about Delaware as if it had two public education systems. And of course, as you will anticipate momentarily, we'll explain that for a good portion of the history, we formally and officially and under law had two public education systems. Well, that's no longer the case, but we functionally have two public education systems, and we won't really know what we have to do about either one if we don't understand how this two-system condition came about and why it still persists despite changes in the law. Now, these two systems it's kind of strange because you say, where do I find them? And the answer is actually you find them all across the state. Sometimes they even inhabit the same space. Just think about it. Sometimes they're even in the same building. There are probably occasions when they're in the same classroom. So you might ask, what differentiates these systems? And that's what I think is important. So if I can get this to work. If not, we'll go back to the old system one. There we go. Here's system one. So let me tell you about system one. System one pretty much serves middle-class kids. It could be lower middle class, upper middle class, not entirely, but from stable families. Communities that are kind of functional. And there are people in those communities and in that family who've experienced the value of education and believe in it for their kids and others. And it's a system for which Delaware and U.S. public education was designed. It was designed for these kids. This is the image of the kids that are going to be in the classroom and that the teachers are going to teach, and they're going to come from home and they're going to be well fed and they're going to arrive at school fairly neatly dressed. They got all the problems little kids have, right? And mostly they're going to pay attention when the teacher talks, and they're going to be pretty compliant with what the rules are. And the system was pretty much designed for these kids. And this system mostly works for these kids, most of whom are white. It's not an accident that most of them are white, and not all of them are white, but most of them are white. Historically, right? Here we're Delaware Historical Society. And most of these students succeed. And here's system two, if we can get it to work. So system two serves kids in poverty. They come from less stable families. Often the community environments in which they grow up are filled with stress and risk. There are often very little in the way of positive experiences or expectations associated with education. These kids have a lot of challenges. They show up at school, they're not always so well nourished. They haven't always had a safe place to sleep the night before. They come with a lot of baggage of mental and other social needs, right? And sometimes I've had teachers tell me that the very fact that they show up is a miracle at school. Right? These kids have very different needs. And Delaware public education, U.S., you can fill in U.S. here anytime you want, it's okay with me, right? Was never designed for these kids. It was never designed to serve these kids. And most of these kids are black and brown. Not all of them, but most of them are black and brown. And too many of them do not succeed. Some of them do, but too many of them don't succeed. So, those are the two systems. And yet, in this world, right, in our state, and by the way, it's not just today, this would have been true 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, so I don't want anybody to read it this way, right? Right? We treat, by state policy, all the students as if they're alike. We design the schools for it as if they're alike. We fund these students as if they're alike. We think that because we give exactly the same number of dollars for every single student, that that's something to do with equality, because we don't look at the needs of the students. Right? But every time we do, that's the way. We just have a funding system that guarantees that we will give exactly the same number of state dollars for every system. And what we have is a situation where we keep trying to make reforms in the system by fitting the kids to the system. Have we got it? This is what we're doing. We're trying to fit the kids to a system that was never designed for them. Right? That has no recognition of anything they need that's any different from any other kid. Got a funding system, a block unit funding system that treats all kids the same and is based on the expectation, which by the way, finance people in the schools love it, because they can predict exactly what they're going to get, when they're going to get it, how many units, how many teachers. They just think it's terrific, right? But it's based on the principle, right, that next year's kids are going to look like last year's kids. Except for a problem, they don't. And then we've made the situation even worse because we've introduced, consciously, by policy, this didn't happen by accident, we've introduced a fragmented governance of public education system. So fragmented, right? So fragmented, so disconnected among those units of authority that it's pretty hard to change anything. It's very hard to change anything. Even with the full power of the state, it's hard to change. This is no accident. Bear with me. So, let me tell you how we got here. Okay, we got here through 120 years of public education policy history. Now, a lot of you in the audience may know a lot more about the history than I do. And I would tell you, you know that because, okay, right, because you lived through some of this history, right? And so it's not for me to tell anyone here about this history experientially. But I can tell you a little bit about policy, right? So just want to make sure we're clear, right, about policy, right? And how we created a policy structure and sustained it over 120 years, that in fact went forward for a while and then went almost back directly in reverse. So let's look at it. I gave you at your place, there's a kind of a one-page history outline, but it's a policy history. It's not about the way things were and how people lived, it's just about the policy kind of structure. I don't know why I'm having trouble with this, but there it is, and don't try to read it there, but it's at your place, and if you don't have one, there's some up here in front which you can get to. And, okay, so I'm only going to go over a couple of things. So 1897. 1897 is an interesting time. State Constitution of Delaware is passed. A year after Plessy versus Ferguson, we all know about that, right, which declared segregation constitutional under the conditions of separate but equal facilities. And of course, as you would expect, one of the first things Delaware did is write that into its constitution. Right? But it wasn't enough because 1921, General Assembly wasn't sure that people really understood, right, that the segregation of schools and separation of schools was a state policy and would be enforced. So we made sure that happened. And then we went ahead, right, and let me just jump forward, right? I'm trying to give you some, these 1954 Brown versus Ford, with what you know, I'm sure a lot of people here, two of those cases were Delaware cases, and in fact, the most determinative case, in my opinion, right, this positive case was the rulings from Cullen Sykes, okay, because he said that in the Delaware case, that separate could never be equal because the resources would never be equal. I want you to keep that in mind. The resources would never be equal. And when you made a separation based on race, okay, that was embedding an inequality in the distribution of resources. So Brown passes based in part on two Delaware cases. What happens in Delaware? Nothing. How long nothing happened? 20 years. Right? I told you it's no accident. 20 years, no governor, no General Assembly, I don't care what party you're in, no General Assembly, okay, took any action in any way to implement the Brown decision. And finally, Judge Murray Schwartz, District Court, said justice delayed is justice denied, enough. Right? And he imposed a unitary principle. I want you to, if you come out of nothing, unitary principle. Right? He said he took 11 school districts in Newcastle County, and he said, I will declare you one school district. And he did it because he said, this is never going to be solved unless everybody's in. You got it. Everybody's in. No suburb, city, everybody's in. He included, I live out in Newark, the old Newark School District, which was at the time the only fully integrated school district in the state of Delaware, and it was the top performing district. Kind of interesting, right? And he said, I'm going to do it because otherwise we'll have white flight. And within weeks of his ruling, court action was taken to begin to unravel it. Are you clear? At the very time we were implementing it, often in a pretty chaotic way, it was chaotic because the General Assembly refused to do anything to prepare us. So when the court order came, everything went scrambled. Right? Not because it couldn't have been done well, right? But it was set up to be that, and that was then used as the excuse. Okay, in 1981, okay, for a 4-district system. That's what we got today. We still have it. 4-district system, supposedly going to uncomplicated. You'll see a little bit more about uncomplicated. You'll see what that is, so-called uncomplicated. 4 districts. We took the unitary. You can see there's a pattern here. I'm going to tell you. You're watching it, right? You started unitary. Everybody was in. Now we're going to set you up. You guys over here, you go to Red Clay, you go to Christina, you go to Brandywine, you go to Colonial. We're each going to give you a piece of the city of Wilmington. Now in between, we had a kind of rule, the Educational Act, you'll see it on there, right? Where we said, hey, all the other districts around, they could combine, but they couldn't combine if they could combine with Wilmington. Right? That was found unconstitutional as part of the process as well. Right? So this was no accident. Right? So we gave everybody, we partitioned the city of Wilmington. You understand what I'm saying? We partitioned the city of Wilmington. Right? And presumed that they would be better off from this partition. Then 1995-96, okay, we found out the federal court, okay, allowed the actual court federal supervision of segregation to end. Everybody thought, oh gee, that was great. What do? Okay, we passed charter legislation. But we did it differently than virtually any other state in the United States. This is why it's policy history. Right? Because it has nothing to do with whether you're for or against charters. Okay? 90% of the authorizers of charter schools in the rest of the country are school districts. Charters are just another kind of school within districts, like magnets, advanced schools, right? All theme schools, whatever, right? They're charter schools. Delaware, 90%, it's now more than 90%, of our charters are authorized by the state, which means, just sit and think, they're little single districts. They're like mini districts. They have the same governing power and autonomy as main districts. Now, we did set up a kind of peculiar funding system because their state funds come through the districts within which they're located. Now in the courts, by the way. Okay, so I will get it. But we set this up. You got it right. So then we took it, so I said fragmentation, 4 districts. Now we said charters, we said choice. And then we ended up with choice with the Neighborhood Schools Act. And the Neighborhood Schools Act said that you must send your kids to the school that's closer to your home. It sounds great. It's terrific. But everyone knew when that was passed that that was another way of resegregating the school. Okay. Just no question. There was no question. It was we do demographic analysis, and we know what it means when you do that. And so what you get, let's keep going. You should get this system. Let me tell you about this system. So this is the product. This is our system. 137,000 roughly, it changes a little bit, public education students. Now here's what I want you to think about. Just bear with me tonight, okay? Bear with me. That's 137, that's for the whole state, public education system. That's 40,000 less students than the Fairfax County, Virginia district. I didn't pick New York. A county, single county in Virginia. 40,000 left, about the same thing, a little bit difference for Montgomery County in Maryland. Okay? But our students are served by 19 school districts, and right now, as of the recent printing, it changes daily, 24 charter schools. We're paying for it, so I want you to think, right, where is the added value for the kids? Right, now by the way, this didn't come down by parental choice. You understand what I'm saying? This did not come down this came down by state policy. People think they chose their district. They didn't choose their district. And the courts had to clear everything, right? So we did it, right? And we're still dealing with it. Let me give you another view. Let's hone in here. Take a look. That's Newcastle County, right? That's the 4th district. Okay, there's Wilmington. Okay, Wilmington is a partitioned city educationally. The only equivalent I can find in history, you're all history buffs, is the partition of Berlin after World War II. And I want to say to you, we have in fact taken down the Berlin Wall. We have not removed the partition of Wilmington. There is no evidence that there is any additional benefit to students from this arrangement. No one's yet been able to produce it. Not for the kids who were supposed to be served by the court decisions. Right? Not by those kids. Remember, they're the ones supposed to benefit. So what did? We tore up their community. We broke the bond between schools and community. The reason America has the most decentralized public education system in the world, and one we applaud and support, is because we believe in the principle of the connection of schools and community. Not only the community within the school, but the school is the anchor of the community. And when you remove the school, you also remove the anchor of the community. And then we talk about the social dysfunction in the communities when we've removed the anchors. But this was not an accident. This was policy. And it still is policy. So what do you get from that policy? You get this. Here's what you got in Wilmington right now. You have approximately 11,500 public education students in the city of Wilmington. They are served by 23 different governing units, each with separate governing authority, with no common plan or goals, and no requirements from any level to even collaborate, nor have any of the leaders of those schools and districts been called together by any governor, secretary, or anyone else for the purposes of promoting collaboration. We believe it will happen now that Governor Carney is committed to doing that, just that. Okay, this way, no one would design a public education system for 11,500 kids with 23 separate governing units, particularly kids at risk, kids who are transient, kids who move a block and find themselves in another school district with different teachers and a different curriculum. You got it? But that's what we got. So we knew what we did when we did it. What we did is we also concentrated poverty. If you would like to use poverty as a marker for race in the city of Wilmington, that's fine, but it is poverty. Right? Are we clear? This is what we did. Right? These are the schools, that's the rate of low-income population. And what we did when we did that is we know we concentrated the problems and challenges that we faced already. Right? We know this wasn't an accident, because we know the following. We know that poverty is the dominant limiting force on educational achievement of all children, including Delaware kids. But we've done it, and we've got it. It wasn't natural law. It wasn't just individual choices. You know, it's a wonderful fiction, but it's just not true. Right? We created this by state policy. We told people what choices they had and didn't have, and we didn't give the kids any choice at all. Right? Maybe their parents had that choice, but the kids didn't have the choice. So now we've got a situation which is becoming increasingly acute. So let me tell you, 2009 down the road in Dover, okay, the state had a Child Poverty Task Force. Child Poverty Task Force in 2009 proposed that we would reduce childhood poverty in Delaware by 50% in 10 years. And it proposed a series of policies at the state level to achieve it. After 2009, we've tracked this now, and between 2009 and 2016, when we finished the analysis, the legislature passed over 200 pieces of legislation, presumably intended, I expect it was well intended, I don't have any question about that, okay, to address the problem of child poverty. The result is that child poverty today is greater than it was in 2009. Incrementally greater? No, not incrementally greater, substantially greater. We have more diversity in our schools across the board, right? More diversity. Today, as we sit here, 51% of the public school population in the state qualifies as low income unless we play a game. And by the way, the game is not ours. This is U.S. Department of Education. I don't want anybody to feel it's not our department. U.S. Department of Education played a game. They changed the measure of low income. It used to be free and reduced lunch. They now said, well, now it's 10. So they made it a more restrictive definition and gave the impression that poverty went down. Low income went down. But in fact, it went up. How do we know it went up? Now, I want you to look at this. Just this one, right? So 2009's right about in here. Right in here, right? And you see what's happened, right? There's a little good news at the tail. The tail, things the last couple of years have been a little better, right? But child poverty is more acute. Remember, poverty's the key limiting force on educational achievement, and we just concentrated levels of poverty in the school, right? And the second thing I want you to know, because they're all adults here tonight, okay, is that the child poverty rate in Delaware is much higher than the adult poverty rate, and it's been growing faster than the adult poverty rate, much faster than the adult poverty rate. Okay, we understand, and I'll tell you that this is not an exaggeration. It's all over the state. The concentration in Wilmington is pretty high, 35%, but look at Dover. What's the county with the highest rate of poverty and fastest growing poverty rate is in western Sussex County. So here's what we've got. This is what we've gotten from our policies, right? Our kids under 18 are the poorest age group in Delaware. And their poverty is increasingly concentrated in certain areas. So let's go and see, what does that mean? So that poverty translates into increased demands on the public education system. How am I doing on time, Katie, okay? Oh, well, I better move fast. Okay. So here's, you ready? Here we go. All right, so here's demands, growth of English language learners, got it? Okay, I'm going to give Katie all these slides, and if you want to look at them, you can. She's got them already, and she'll post them. Right? Increase in English language learners, right? You think that's demands in public education system? Don't you think? Okay, how about Did I skip one?
Yeah.
Yeah, here's special ed. Right? It's going up, right? Here's homeless kids. By the way, home ownership in Delaware is up, and homelessness among kids is up. How's that? Look at that rate. Homelessness is up. And then when the demands, increase, here's what happens. Take a look at spending. You do see the slope of that curve, right? The blue line, state spending. You know there's only one source of spending that's going down. You all wanted the federal government out of public education. We got it. So that's going to increase the demand. Are we clear? Increase the demand. We spent about $2.3 billion public education, right? The biggest piece is at the state level. And the per student cost is over $17,000. Let me tell you, so when people say we spend a lot of money, we sure do. I can tell you that's a lot more than in-state tuition at the University of Delaware. But you have to ask them, what are you spending it on? What are you spending it on? Because I'll tell you, despite all we have, despite all we spend, we're still one of 15 states with no direct allocation for low-income kids. Not a dime in direct allocation at the state level. We use the money for that purpose. We use the money, but there's nothing in our unit system for, we're one of 4 states, when we started this, I think we were 5 or 6 states, now we're down to 4, that has no money for English language learners. So we're spending a lot. And we're also a state in which we don't make basic special education available to our funding from the state, available for our kids till they're in 4th grade, even though we evaluate them in infancy. So we've got some problems, folks. We are spending. And I'll tell you, we keep this system, we're going to keep spending a lot more. Now we have weak state revenues. We have made it almost impossible. I mean, if a district goes out and gets a referendum passed, it's miraculous. It's considered almost a miracle. Right? But the cost is going up. The demand's going up. The cost is going up. Bear with me a little bit more. And then what do we get for it? Here's the worst. Here's education outcomes. So across Delaware, the achievement gap has been sustained between richer, middle class, they don't have to be rich kids, right? And poor. Usually it's black and white, right? These things are kind of correlated, right? And the number of Black, Hispanic kids who are actually finishing and succeeding as they can is actually no longer as large a percentage, so we have larger numbers not. And here's, I want to show you 2 charts. You don't have to read anything here, okay? So we took the Department of Education reports on all the school, on all the test scores, last Smarter Balance, okay? And I'm not a big test score person, don't. I just wanted to show you what the achievement gap means, what poverty means when we say it's limited. Okay, I want you to know that the red, right, that this is proficiency right here, this black. That's proficiency, right? Doesn't really matter. I don't care if it's English language. That's not the point. Here's proficiency, and the red is low income, is poverty. Okay, now that's what you got. This one I think happens to be English language arts. I think it's even more acute for math. And you say, well, it's not perfect, and I say, thank God. Thank God. But I mean, thank God it's not an absolute sentence that you can't ever learn, no school can ever do better, nothing can matter. Nobody's arguing that. I'm just saying it's the principal limiting factor. It's here. It's clear. Right? We're not picking on any particular school or district. By the way, there are no high school kids here because we didn't do the high school test. Right? So that's an example of an achievement gap, right? That's one way to think of it. Just proficiency against low income. Right? There's a lot of other ways. We could have looked at graduation rates. I won't go into it because we don't have time, but you'll get the slides and you'll see it all. And then, of course, we could drill down, and I'm sure Darrell's going to talk about this, right, is that everything I just portrayed is more acute in the city. And why would we be surprised it's more acute when decades after decades of policies have resulted in the highest concentrations of poverty in this community, right, in our schools, right? We said, here's where we're going to put the kids, highest concentrations of poverty, and amazingly, right, we find problems with their schools. And we find violence in their communities. And we wonder what happens when somebody says, oh, we've lost social cohesion. Well, we've eliminated some of the anchors that used to be the basis of social cohesion. Where do we expect social cohesion to come from? I mean, what is the logic model for social cohesion when you remove the schools? There is today no traditional public school in the city of Wilmington. A lot of people think high schools are places where you not only learn a lot, but you build a connection with who you are as a kid in a formative stage. Okay. So I won't go here because I'm sure we'll get into that some more. That's just another summary on education outcomes, and I could give you conclusions. I'm not going to do that here. You don't need it. You've got it clear. So what's to be done? So at your place, what should be done? Nobody's got a magic bullet, and we have said, that we being Wilmington Education, that there is no magic bullet. There's no quick fix. There's no simple out. Right? It took us since 1897 to get into the mess we're in, and it's going to take a while out, but we're only going to get out if we have a comprehensive way of addressing the challenges that face us. And we've said that comprehensive way includes progress along 3 different paths at the same time. And we're not foolish. We know that it's not all going to happen tomorrow. The first thing is you've got to start meeting the needs of kids in poverty. And start redesigning the system to fit the needs of the kids. Not trying to keep pushing the kids into the system that was never designed for them. I see pretty much every educator I know in the room nodding their heads. We didn't make this up. We got it from the folks who are on the front lines with these kids, right? So you got to do it. And you can't just do it in the schools. You got to do it before school. You got to do it after school. You got to do it year-round. You got to give kids who are at risk an anchor in their life that can support their achievement and success. Then the second thing is you got to actually change the funding system so we don't treat all the kids as if they're alike. We treat all the kids as if they get what they need to be able to succeed. Wouldn't that be great? Not so easy. And then we said, you're not going to get any of this if you don't generate some coherence in the government system. It just isn't going to happen. It isn't going to happen. You've created these separate domains of authority, right, that basically compete with one another for enrollments which generate cash dollars or units with no evidence that there's significant improvement overall. And so we've said, that's hard to do. It's hard to do. We made a proposal for years, and in the end, the same thing happened to it as everything else. People wondered where our redistricting proposal. By the way, we told people, you didn't like our proposal, where's yours? It's okay. It's really all right. It's fine. We're not pushing. You don't like that one? Give us one. But in fact, the answer that we got when we went to legislative hall, in the end, over 2 years, was we will make no decision. They didn't. We said, vote it up or down. They wouldn't vote it down. They just stepped back. I'm not being too harsh. It's exactly what they did. They let it die, as we have done before. So that's the pattern. I'm going to leave it here, right? Because I think it's just a context within which then we can consider what's taking place and how we can actually make some improvements in these conditions. All right. Thank you.
Director of Higher Education for the Delaware Department of Education. And as one of the few people in the room who's probably been here in Delaware most of her life, and whose family is also from Delaware, I thought, since we're in the Delaware History Museum, I'd start by telling my story. Because I think the story of your family and the story of my family in particular is an important part as we think about race and education here in Delaware. And my lens is really around preparing for college and the impact of all that Dan has shared with us on students as they're exiting our public education system and preparing for their future. The impact of those choices that we've made as a state through policy. So I start by telling the story of my grandparents. So my grandfather came from North Carolina with an 8th grade education. He was well known throughout the state for all of his Exxon gas stations that he owned. Many people knew him just because of the gas station. It was a place to stop. But he only had an 8th grade education. But with that 8th grade education, he supported his 2 sons, his wife, his 11 siblings, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and he created a foundation for our family that we are still surviving on now. His wife tried to go to high school, but she was in Dorchester County, and high school was so far away that she had to go live with another family. And ultimately her mother said, "We can't do that. You have to come home. We need you to work." So she sacrificed her opportunity to go to high school so that she could support her family. Later, as her children graduated, she chose to go back and get her GED because her education was that important to her. Then my other grandmother went to Howard High School here in Wilmington. She took the bus every day with her cousin from Glasgow, or what we call the country. It's no longer the country, but it was then, to graduate from Howard High School in 1952. My parents both went to Christiana High School. My father went on to Del State, was unable to graduate, but he had a full athletic scholarship. My mother, who if she was in the room, she'd know I'm saying the truth, is an overachiever, got 5 degrees, still working on another one. Don't ask me why. But that's my foundation. It's a family who thought education was so important that no matter what it took, they're willing to make the sacrifices to get the education, not just for themselves, but to ensure that we had it. So you can imagine with that type of pedigree and background that college was not an option for me. So when the time came and the opportunity to go to Yale was on the table, it was very clear to me from my family that that was not a choice either. And so I'm a proud graduate of Yale University, but I also recognize the privilege that that provides me and the privilege of what my family sacrificed to open that door for me. But I'm also a product of Christina schools. And I remember going to Bancroft Elementary, and I remember riding the bus every day because of the policy history that we talked about. I lived in Newark. I rode the bus for 45 minutes every day, back and forth, one way, to get to school. But it was one of the best experiences I have. I still remember Mr. Pritchett coming to check on me every single day. I never missed a hug. And I remember Mr. Clark checking on me and making sure that I was doing well and thriving. So that was my foundation. I had an army of advocates there for me in school every single day. I remember my mother coming to the classroom when I got in trouble for daydreaming, to work with the teacher to help her understand that it wasn't that I was trying to cause trouble, I was just bored. I remember them working together to figure out a different education plan for me. And when it happened again, I remember them sitting there and figuring it out once again. My mother came and spent the day and bought lunch and said, "We gotta figure this out, she needs more." But what do we do for the students who don't have those kinds of advocates? What do we do when the parents can't take a day off and bring lunch to help the teachers figure out a plan for their children? What do we do when you don't have a family who has the ability to understand what those needs might be or to communicate it in a way that they can get those needs met for those children? And that's the impact that we see in our schools each and every day. And that's what I want to focus on. So I was asked to talk about college affordability. And I shared that story because so many of my family members had the opportunity to either experience a high school degree, a high school diploma, or a college degree, which meant I had that experience. But many of our students are graduating from our high schools where no one in their families had that experience, where they'll be the first ones to even consider it, the first ones to step foot on a campus. The first time they step on a campus may be the very first day they take a class. And so our job as a state is to make sure that they have a structure in place to support them. But it's not just to get them there, because what we're finding is that as our students are graduating from high school and going on to college, 41% of them are not ready for the classes they're supposed to take when they get there. So they're starting behind. We graduated them. We said that every student graduates college and career ready, but they get to college and they're not ready. So they have to take remedial courses. Those courses are making them have to take content that they should have learned when they were in middle school or high school. So now we're asking students who are coming to college, often the first in their family to go to college, to take more classes than their peers have to take. Pay for those classes. And then the statistics tell us they're less likely to graduate. So we put a structure in place to get them in college, but we haven't prepared them for college. And then they get to college and they're unlikely to finish. And you combine that with the rising rates of the cost of college. And so we have students who are dropping out with high debt, no college credit, an economy that has shifted. For those of you who may have grown up in Delaware or been here long enough, how many of you remember Chrysler or Delaware Seed Company? That was my backyard, so we knew Chrysler. We knew how to tell time when the shift changed by Chrysler. So that paid for a lot of things in my family. And it provided a great background and a foundation for us. And you didn't need a college degree to work at Chrysler. You could pay for your family, you could take care of your family, you could have a good living, but those jobs are gone. And the jobs that are being replaced are jobs that require more than a high school diploma. So now our students need either a certificate or an associate's degree or an apprenticeship or bachelor's degree. And they need to be prepared to access those things. 2/3 of our jobs in our economy over the next 10 years will require students to have more than a high school diploma. 2/3. The remaining 1/3 that are a high school diploma, think about what those wages are going to be. How are they going to prepare and take care of their families? So as we continue to send a message to our students, it's okay to not go to college. Not everybody needs to go to college. Are we preparing them for the future that is here at our doorstep? And what are the choices that we make each and every day in our schools doing to impact those students if we are making choices that limit their access? But it doesn't start on the doorstep of the college. It starts while they're in our high school. It starts while they're in our middle schools. It starts before they even enter kindergarten. So as a parent, as a community member working with students, you have to ask yourself the questions. If this student is on a path to be ready for college courses, what courses are they taking when they're in middle school? And how does that impact what they have access to when they get to high school? And how does that impact what they're ready for when they get to college? What's their performance rate on their assessments test when they're in elementary school? Are they reading by 3rd grade? When we don't see those things happen, you can predict that they're going to need remediation when they get to college, if they get to college. So we have to ask ourselves those questions, and as we're thinking about their path and we're thinking about their options, we also need to ask the question of, am I putting them on a path that limits them? So often we will say, just go get the certificate. It's cheaper, you'll start working faster. But do we factor in the fact that the certificate is limited in what it teaches you? So if there's no job associated with that certificate, or if they don't complete the certificate, or if they get the job and decide, I don't like it, and I want to do something different, they have to start all over again. If they go to get the associate's degree, but they have to take remedial classes, and they use all of their seed scholarship that pays for the community college here in Delaware, because we were the first to have free community college, and they use their seed scholarship to pay for the remedial courses, then how do they pay for the actual classes they need to get the associate's degree? And if we send them to get a bachelor's degree, but we focus more on the name of the college than we do on the bill, and on what the college offers, and on whether the college is giving them an opportunity to get exposure to work while they're in college so they can know what they're preparing for and how the degree will help them, And are we making the right choices for our students? And all of these things have an impact on whether or not our students are prepared for their future. And so in the back, there's a report that we release each year called the College Success Report. And it's a state of the state report that talks about our college remediation rates. But I want to call out a few statistics in particular. As we're talking about race and we're talking about poverty, when we look at remediation, how does it impact students differently? Just bear with me as I get to the slide where I have the numbers. So our state rate for remediation is 41%. Let's get that right. But when you start looking at different groups of students, African American students going to college, 54% of them will need remediation. Students coming from low-income households, 54% will need remediation. Students who are English language learners, 49% will need remediation. Now here's the one that hurts. Students who are identified as needing special education, 78% will need remediation. That's almost all of them. So we are doing a disservice, we are failing our students, we are not preparing them. When you compare that to students who are white, 34%. Students who are Asian, 14%. You can't help but ask the question, what's the difference? They're going to the same schools. So we started to look deeper and ask the question, what is the difference? What's the difference in the courses that they're taking while they're in high school? And you didn't have to go far to see the difference. You can just look at their 12th grade experience. Students who are taking statistics as their 12th grade math class are more likely to need remediation than students who are taking pre-calculus or calculus. Why? Because statistics is the dumping ground for 12th grade. Students who are not ready for pre-calculus or calculus, there aren't a lot of options in 12th grade, but students need a fourth year math, so they end up in statistics. And you can talk to any school and they will tell you largely the same thing, and I see Darrell nodding his head, I know they had the same experience in Brandywine. On the English side, students who are in college prep English are more likely to need remediation. Now think about that. The class is called College Prep English. So why doesn't it prepare you for college? But when we talk to teachers about it, it's an unspoken rule and understanding that that's just the class that used to be general English, and now it's called college prep. It was never intended to prepare them for college. The college courses are the AP courses, the advanced placement courses, the dual enrollment classes, occasionally the honors classes, but not the college prep classes. So now we're lying to students, because when they see themselves in a college prep class, if I was a student in a college prep class and I got a B, I think I'm good, doing pretty good, right? Until I take that placement test. So we have to ask more questions. We have to ask, how do the decisions and the messages that we're sending to students impact what we are preparing them for? We're not even telling them that the classes they're in won't prepare them. We're not telling them that their high school diploma won't prepare them. And then they show up on the campus and someone says, hey, you're not ready. How are they going to be motivated to press on and graduate and get through those extra classes when they see their peers who were in the same school starting off far ahead? So I leave you with that. That it's, as we think about policy decisions, as we think about advising students, we have to think about that it's not just while they're in our K-12 system. It's also the impact on their future, the access that they have to careers, and students who are already facing a number of barriers and walls and hurdles that they have to overcome. We're creating even more hurdles for them. And it continues for the rest of their lives.
So I need everyone to take a deep breath. Between Sean's presentation and opening and Dr. Rich's presentation, I mean, it's heavy stuff. right? That I think it definitely touches our hearts, and if it doesn't touch our heart, then we need an EMT to check because someone doesn't have a pulse. I'm the other side of Shauna's coin, and you know, I think Dr. Rich indicated, I think the policy and the laws are clear, just in terms of why we are where we are right now. In a city where we've experienced the 175th shooting yesterday, a 19-year-old was violently killed. I got a call today, I believe 17 students, young people that I've touched somewhere along the way were indicted on gang charges. It hadn't hit the press yet, so it's likely to make the news shortly. I grew up in Maryland, Eastern Shore. I was born in a small town called Eastern Maryland. Grew up a little country boy. Fished, hunt, you know, played outdoors. We cooked bologna in the woods. And then around 4th grade, I moved to the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, right around the heart of the crack epidemic. So between 1985 and 1992 were my formative years where our nation's capital was known as the murder capital of the world, where we ranged and experienced anywhere between 500 to 600 homicides a year. I'm the youngest of 3, the first to go to college, but I'm also a product of Head Start. My mother had an 11th grade education. My father spent 4 years in the Air Force. My sister is, to this day, still working at the first job she ever had at Safeway. And my brother, who was probably the smartest of us all, chose a different career path, and it was the path of the streets. And when we talk about policies, and I want to broaden this context and not just really look at it from the lens of educational policy, but when we look at housing, when we look at social justice, social injustice, policing, all of those various things impact what Dr. Rich talked about when we talk about communities of trauma, communities of poverty, which ultimately goes into what our children bring to school, and unfortunately what our teachers are unable to meet the needs of the children because they aren't equipped, because the system in essence inherently isn't set up for them to meet the needs of children and families. So from that Head Start opportunity, it truly did give me a head start. And I had an experience where my high school, I was smarter than I actually realized. As a result of it, I always tested well, so I always ended up in higher level courses because I did well on standardized tests. We used to take the California Achievement Test. I didn't show my age. It very well. And I would always find myself in challenging environments where I would actually have to work so much harder than my peers in those classes because, one, I always found myself to be the only one in a lot of those settings, and 2, everything seemed to come easier for everybody else in those settings. Where it would take me longer to read, it would take me longer to produce my work, but the one thing that I did have were people and systems that actually came alongside me to provide me with that support and that foundation that I needed so that I wouldn't give up. And I had a 10th grade teacher by the name of Miss Melanie Caldwell, and you know, the old adage, it takes a village, and I know that sounds cliche, but if she didn't step up at the time and point in which she did in my life, I wouldn't be where I am today, you know, being able to lead and run the office that I'm leading, to ultimately get back to try to change the system for children in the city of Wilmington, just as she did for me. And this is what she did, because I ended up in a college prep course. In that class, I was in all honors classes, my grades dropped, so they stripped me of my honors schedule and they gave me a college prep schedule. And I ended up in a class called Cultural Diversity. And in that Cultural Diversity class, I probably learned more in that class because it was all about subliminal messages. And Ms. Caldwell taught me a lot about myself, but the very thing she asked me, she said, why are you in my class? Because she saw that I was bored. So the very next day, I show up for my first period class. I had it for first period. I'm in 10th grade. I'm a sophomore in high school. My school counselor was in there. And that was the first time I ever met my guidance counselor. And I think that's also an experience when we talk about systems that a lot of our children in these schools experience, because you have to seek out your counselor. Your counselor in some instances don't seek you out or look to introduce themselves to put you on a path to success. And what Ms. Caldwell did for me, she said, you know what, you're going to give him his schedule back. And I'm going to ensure that I support him to make sure that he doesn't end up in my class again. And she took a chance on me. And I was beholden to Ms. Caldwell because not that my parents didn't have the, I would say, wherewithal to make education important. They were busy surviving. You know, my father worked 2 and 3 jobs from, as long as I know him until he retired. And my mother literally worked on 11th grade education, was a nurse's assistant for over 30 years. So times had changed because she didn't have a high school diploma, but she was able to retire after 33 years of service in the healthcare industry. You can't do that anymore in this day and age. So when we're telling children to get a certificate or go get your GED, or we're not ensuring that they have the foundational skills and the content that's culturally relevant to connect them to learning. I was in a walkthrough yesterday in one of the elementary schools that will remain nameless, and a young man, Ramir, was reading a story. He was reading it on the computer, and it was about penguins. And I just probed and I said, "What are you reading?" A story about penguins. "Are you interested in it?" "No." "So why are you doing it?" "Because the teacher tells us we got to do it." He was so disengaged in the learning process. There was no connection for him, and it all stems back from this historic policy. And the one thing that I think we have to understand, the only change that's happened in this state was court order. The only change that has happened thus far to try to level the system that Dr. Rich highlighted was court order. But none of those orders were ever followed. Schools are desegregated. It took 20 years. Once they were changed, we were under federal supervision until 1995-96. And then inherently we resegregated schools in 2001 with the Neighborhood Schools Act. So now we find ourselves where we are. For me, as a leader, I've always saw myself as an advocate for children based on the experience that I've had as a child. Understanding that inherently we have to fight a system from within, but also try to change it from the outside as well. And when we have people who make decisions who don't see the human aspect of the decisions and the impact of the decisions that they're making, we're reaping what we sow right now. So I'm not going to belabor, but I think the history is clear. And even as an educator, again, not being from Delaware, I was forced to learn the history through the Neighborhood Schools Act. So my first teaching experience was a 6th grade teacher at Bancroft under Mr. Pritchett and Mr. Vassos. So Mr. Pritchett influenced a lot of people. But the interesting thing was, and Dr. Rich brought up the unit count. So I was hired because the school generated an additional teacher unit because of the number of children that they had. So the proverbial September 30 count for those of you who are familiar with Delaware school funding. So interesting enough, the 6th grade team were able to divide up the class to give the new teacher the new group of students. So you know who I ended up with. All the ones that they didn't want. And it was a crash course, you know, in the teaching and learning, and a valuable lesson that I learned because I came literally into a blank classroom. And I had to introduce myself to students who basically were given to me by other teachers who now they felt didn't want them. So they were going to test me, but one of the things that I learned that first year that I never did, I never set up my classroom after that first year. I always let my students design and set and decorate the classroom the way that they wanted. And a custodian never had to clean my classroom because they always kept it clean. So there's a lot that goes into inadequate facilities. When you look at the level and rate, and we talk about we're in a tech-driven world, but the infrastructure doesn't support technology in our urban schools, and then you go out to our suburban schools, you have no issue or no problem with Wi-Fi connection. Your laptops automatically connect to it, but then we go to the city schools, they still have the portable projectors and pull down, and we see blight. And that notion of the broken window effect, where you see blight all day long, and then you have to walk into a building that is supposed to change your perspective and outlook and motivate you to want to be something better and something different than what you see every day, but yet we just continually reinforce that. So from that day when I realized and I had my colleagues basically give me the children that they wouldn't say it, but they likely wrote off because obviously they didn't want to keep them. And I went from buy to subs because I got ripped, because I was on a temporary contract. And that was new to me, talk about education policy. Someone who was committed to urban education, I was like that. So then fortunate enough for me, in late August, I got called back and they said, "You're going to get assigned to Stubbs." I didn't know where Stubbs was. I go to Stubbs, fourth grade, had 41 children with 17 identified special needs. And then the same thing happened. September 30th count came, we can generate another unit. So then they hired someone else. Then I had to split my classroom up. So then I ended up in the same situation that my colleagues were in the year before. Who do I keep, who do I let go? So fortunate enough for me, my teaching partner, in that instance, we actually co-taught and we kept a somewhat a departmentalized type situation because I didn't want to let any one of the 41 go. But I just say all of that to say, we see things from our perspective until it gets humanized, until you have that experience of riding a bus for 45 minutes, until you actually go into schools and see the conditions and interact with children and the educators and the school leaders, well, it stirred up enough emotion within us to actually take action. Because we're at 175 right now. And that's a direct result of the failed policies, of the failed decisions, and the fact that we sat idle for so long waiting for somebody else to make the decisions that we're making. And for me, I don't want to look back for history to say back in 2017, just as we're looking back to 1897, understanding that we're living history. So it is truly up to us. Regardless of your socioeconomic status, regardless of your race, it's beholden upon all of us, whether you're educated, whether you're in the business community, faith-based community. Injustice is injustice, and that's what we're doing to our children who go to schools, not only in the city of Wilmington, but it's happening across the state. The Route 40 corridor isn't any better. As Dr. Rich highlighted, there's just as much poverty concentrated in Delaware as it is in Wilmington. But now is the time, I think, for us to be truly called to action and understand that whether you had family members that supported you or sisters that supported you, it is possible. And our children deserve better, they deserve more, and I think now is the time for us to act. So, thank you.
We can take some questions from the audience.
Sure. Yeah, I've been fortunate to be able to transition from a business career. Now I'm looking for an educational nonprofit and taking courses in public policy at Delaware. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's going to be better. I apologize. I've been fortunate to transition from a business career and now working for an educational nonprofit. And fortunate enough also to, because of the state of Delaware's act that allows me to go back to Delaware and not pay any tuition, I'm taking some public policy courses. And I just read a study from Washington State University about the direct correlation of those who score high in ACE scoring, adverse childhood experiences. It's systemic trauma for low-income and poverty kids, and the direct correlation to their failures, behavioral problems, violence, and attendance problems, and the need for proper training for staff to understand how to treat and care for these trauma-induced situations. I didn't know what Delaware was looking at that for.
So there is a lot of movement. Prior to taking this role with the Department of Ed, we started to work in 2013 in Brandywine School District, and what the gentleman was referencing was a study that was conducted by the Center for Disease Control and Causa Permanente, actually around 1994, on adverse childhood experiences. And basically there were two doctors who were doing two separate studies, but realized that they were having similar outcomes. One was an obesity clinic, Dr. Ahn and Dr. Folletti, and the obesity clinic, what he realized was that the patients that were regaining the weight after they lost the weight, he started probing and surveying them, and what he realized is that they suffered from sexual abuse as children. And it was 55% up. And then the other one was smoking clinic, and they were looking at basically health outcomes. So the two doctors, through this adverse childhood experience study, were able to trace that things that happen to us as children ultimately impact us in our adulthood. Health outrisks, early death, smoking, COPD, different things. But the interesting thing was it wasn't just for children in poverty. The study was actually for 17,000 predominantly white, middle-class, college-educated patients who were receiving health care through Kaiser Permanente Network. But what we realize is when you deal and come from communities with chronic stress, you know, it manifests itself in ways that it's not ADHD. It's actually stress, chronic stress, that children are literally physiologically going through something that they just simply can't keep still because it's fight or flight mode continually. And we have systems that tell children, you're gonna walk in a line, you're gonna sit down, you're gonna be quiet, and they can't. So when we talk about structuring learning environments to meet the needs of children, that's how we have to think of things differently. When we look at disproportionality, because we are over-identifying black males in special education with emotional disability, it's likely linked to this community violence and trauma that they're experiencing. And when we talk about race, and I use it as a personal connection, my first library card actually was as a result with a police encounter in Prince George's County, Maryland. And at that time, they would give you library cards that was a picture ID. You would go to the library, they would take your picture, and they would put your picture on your library card. And I went home because I was called out of my name by a black police officer, mind you, in my community. And I went home and I was upset, and I had a conversation with my father, and he said, well, if you don't know who you are, how do you expect them to know who you are?
Oh, wow.
So he said, Shirley, because that's my mother's name, he said, give that boy his social security card. So I memorized my social security number, and he took me to the library, and I got my library card. But think about the young men who navigate our streets, who don't have a man in the household because of mass incarceration, when we talk about social policy, for misdemeanors and crime because they can't post bail. So then you sit in jail because of the simple fact that I can't post bail. And then I lose my job. And now I have to get out. Now I have to make a choice between my family eating and me taking a chance to end up back in prison. So all of this plays a factor into what we're talking about with regards to school, but I know I went long-winded about your question about ACEs. So we are doing that work, but it's one thing to be aware that children are experiencing trauma. It's another thing to now move that system to the point where we teach them how to be resilient and how they can recognize the signs and symptoms of their trauma and engage them in the process to help them elevate and move beyond understanding that your circumstances don't define who you are or the possibilities of your outcome are. So there's a number of work. I know there's a Western Sussex Summit that's going to take place December 1st. It's focused around trauma, the Office of Child Advocacy, the Delaware Department of Education, Children's and Families First. So there's a lot of work going on. We have the fortune of actually introducing trauma in this work around ACEs to over 2,000 educators across the state over the past 2 years.
So I want to add something just in context. And you know, first is just to, I would hope that you would take from what we discussed here, all of us, not some sense of inevitable despair, but actually that the conditions that we're experiencing, and more importantly that our children, our students, the generations of them are experiencing, were constructed. And while we might be angry, as about it being constructed, that means they can also be reconstructed. They were not just handed down as some inevitable outcome because of people and what they were. It's not. And you know, we seem content as, I believe, a state and a society to be willing to blame anything other than ourselves for the actual perpetuation of these conditions. Right? We'll blame the teachers, we'll blame the principals, we'll blame the kids themselves, their parents, the communities, when in fact we created structures that sustain these kinds of conditions, and we know what we need to do is change those kinds of structures. And then I've got another piece, because your question prompted it. So we know that this doesn't only deal with the questions of trauma, but in fact that we have inherited a public education system nationally that looks more like an industrial factory structure than what's needed for a 21st century education for all the kids, to actually deal with this. And we kind of need, I have a suggestion for you, if you want to find a way to think about this larger question, because we've got to go in there and do something right now for these kids. And while we're doing something right now, we also need to change the system. So it's not this or that, it's this and that, right? Because we're not going to wait around to change the system. That hasn't been working too well, huh? Okay, before we help the kids, but we still have to change the system. When you think change the system, okay, don't just think about changing what went wrong. Take a look, there's a fellow named Sir Ken Robinson. Sir Ken Robinson, right? And you can look him up, you can Google him, right? And he'll talk about changing education paradigms. But get the version of it that says RSA, just goes like letter, animate. You'll love it, 11 and a half minutes. Okay, it's an animated version of his TED Talk, right? In which he basically takes on the whole structure, right? We now know from neuroscience, right, what we only knew before as parents and grandparents and teachers, right? Okay, we know 90% of brain growth occurs in the first 5 years of life. When did we start public education? Right, age 5, right? We know that teenagers are hardly awake until around noon. What do we send to school first? We know little tiny kids are awake at 6 a.m. We keep them home. You see where I'm going, right? Right? So there's a lot. I know we focused here, but while we're making these changes, we could change public education for all kids for the better.
So, right on that note, I'm Shelley Suchi, and since I've been in education for 22 years, always in the city of Wilmington. I live here now. I grew up here. The children actually look out of Pulaski and see the house that I grew up in and tell me I was actually poorer than that. It always makes my day. I split my time between Pulaski Elementary and Albert Palmer because I'm the talented and gifted teacher and the technology person. So you talk about our prison systems and everything we do. I am one person split between 2 schools. My worst behaved children in our schools are actually with me. Because you know what? My kids are amazing because they're talented. It's just whether or not they use their talents, as some of the teachers said, for good or evil. Our child that has had the most suspensions in 5th grade in one of our schools gave up 5 recesses to come code, write computer programs. He doesn't even have internet or a front door that locks. But he comes into our schools and he's safe. And he gets opportunities. We have no unit counts for spec ed before 3rd grade. 25% of our schools in the city of Wilmington are made up of spec ed at every grade. Every grade. So that means we give up one of 2 things. We either give up our specials, our music, our art, library, technology, or we give up giving our children special ed and extra help in smaller class sizes. Unlike you, I grew up here. I was reported, like my kid said, but walked 4 steps down to my front door. The house that I grew up in. I went to high school on a scholarship, to a private high school, because somebody picked me up off the streets and gave me a chance. I went to college in 3 years because I couldn't afford the 4th year of my scholarship didn't pay. I came from a family that had nothing. And my kids, I will never feel like I had the boarders when she hired me, was I was never leaving the city of Wilmington. But I can only do so much. My own son's graduated University of Delaware and come back and help in the city. So how do we make, because my parents can't fight. They're not the suburban parents. They're not going to get up and hold their breath until they get the money. I watched 4 of my parents, I passed them on the way here just to be able to get to the store. They have to take 4 buses because there's no grocery store. And kids in the suburbs, I get it. My kids understand it, their best friends are. I'm not telling you that there aren't options. But until somebody realizes and figures out that, yes, I get it, the tracks, but you're going to be building prisons for our kids that can't read in the 3rd grade. So tell me what I do, because my brothers will tell you, I'm the person that stood up. Whoever talked, the governor called me out last night about the building issues in Pulaski, because I was the one spent all last year stomping on the front page to make sure my kids were safe. So I don't know what else to do. There's only so many of us, and we bend over backwards. We take kids home with us. We feed them. We clothe them. We are their parents, and I don't know what else to do. And I'm glad that you're here having this discussion, and we can talk about all the policy you want. But until every person in this room comes in and spends a day with one of my kids and picks it up and says, I'll be the mentor, I'll be the role model, and it won't be at lunchtime once a month. I will be there day in and day out. It's not going to change. And you can throw all the money you want at it. It's relationships.
That's right. That's right.
So there's great power in what you've said and passion, and I appreciate it. I understand. But I also don't want us to accept the delusion that's portrayed for us about practicality, and allow ourselves to be passive and know when you live it, see, experience it. So the current arrangement is unsustainable. It is unsustainable because we will have escalating costs with no improvement of outcomes for our community and our children. And it will ultimately be the undoing. There are some folks who believe they can resist it long enough that they'll be a little bit better off for a little while, right? But they won't. There are things, one thing that we can do, right? But I don't mean you, we can do, right? Is we could try to remove the illusion, right? That's what we could try to do. If we just said, no, it's just not true. We're not going to accept what you define as what's practical because it's not true. It doesn't cost more. It's not that we don't have enough money. We're spending boodles of money. We're giving it to your kids. That's the problem. We're not giving it to your kids, right? There's plenty of money. This is all a matter of priorities, right? We're sustaining all this infrastructure. We can do it, right? I told you, we spend more per kid than we spend on putting a kid through the University of Delaware. I mean, we spend, but we're not getting it to your kids. At the local level, we have another fiction. We have not had property reassessment in Newcastle County since 1983. When you don't have a property reassessment, you mean it's unequal distribution of the burden of property taxes, and folks, right, who oftentimes folks with less income end up paying more, and other folks are paying a lot less. I think it's bad here, 86 in Kent, and in Sussex County, they have not had property reassessment since 1974. You think there's been any change in value of property along the shore, right? So this is the delusion, right, when they say there's no money. They just mean you're not going to pay for it. You're not going to pay for these kids. I mean, this is the dilemma, and it's a lack of political will. So what can we do? You're doing all you can. What we can do is take away the illusion and say, no, we can do it. We can redirect it. I mean, part of it, I just want to say, part of what we said in the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission reports is, here's what you can do. People say, oh, we can't change. You can do it. Here's what it'll cost you. We told you exactly. We estimated. Right? In a $2.3 billion budget, it would cost you $45 million to add a unit to support low-income kids, English language learners, and basic special education. Okay, 45. That's not much. Look at my friend Paul Harris. It's not much. It's hardly. I mean, it's a lot of money when you think again. It's $2.3 billion. What they're really saying is we are not willing to put that money in those kids, right? And so when they tell you that, I think you ought to take them on. right? It's just, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
I'm not a policy guy, I'm not a politician or anything like that, but I was just at the city council meeting, and I work with Parks and Rec now. My name is D. Marquis Hall, and some of the, I'm an artist, and I work with the young people, I work with after-school programs, and I feel like there's a disconnect between the public that cares, that feels stepped over, that feels stepped on, and the people that are empowered to make the decisions. And when they brought up the budget and how much money they had at the very beginning, they went through the treasurer, what it is that she $400 million was the number somewhere around there. And then Parks and Rec, there's a park seating place, we needed $100,000 for that, and they yes that. And there's $300,000 that we need for another park, and they yes that through. So there is money, like he just said, and the only reason I'm saying that is because you just brought up the money and the policy and all that. And the feelings, I want to get all the way back to what Dr. Green, right?
I'm working on it.
I'm sorry.
I appreciate it. Speaking.
Mr. Darrell Green, you said identity. You mentioned that your dad said that how's he going to call you by your name, or how's he going to call you if you don't know who you are. So I feel like as young black men, as young black boys, when we don't get education about who it is that we are, when we don't learn about the leaders that came before us, male and female leaders that look like us, when we don't learn about Mary McLeod Bethune, when we don't learn about Maya Angelou, we don't learn about Coretta Scott King, we just learn about Dr. King, we don't even learn the truth about Dr. King, we don't know everything about him, and we only learn about him once a year during February, and we only learn about one speech. I feel like we're depriving our children, and it's a system that is designed to keep us not knowing who it is that we are, or knowing our true greatness. And when you think about Thomas Edison, we had Thomas Edison school here. He made a light bulb that only lasted for a day or two, but we don't learn about Louis Latimer making a light bulb that had a carbon filament that lasted for. These are the light bulbs that we use now, made by a black man, Louis Latimer. So what I do, I make coloring books, and I give them to the young people that have leaders. They have leaders that look like us, and leaders that look like other people. I have human books, I call them, that have all different nationalities. People that we don't learn about, people that we're not taught about, so that they might hold on to it, and it can be something that they could actually relate to, and it can inspire them to do better. Because just like you said, your brother, you say he's the smartest one, he ended up.
Yes, sir.
We could be engineers and scientists and all that, but a lot of times we go out and make mistakes that we don't want them to make now. So I feel like we need to do something. We need solutions, because we got a lot of problems, but I feel like my books are solutions, and I want to give them to the children at Brandywine. You got a couple of them. So I want to come up and get more books out to them.
And I think that's the other thing too, that you bring up. A real point is, we have to define our community. There are a number of supports. Hold on. I'm just going to say, you brought up the issue about community, and there's a lot of positives that truly are happening in our community as well. And I can think back to actually one of the biggest cultural experiences as a fourth grade teacher at Stubbs was discovering Christiana cultural arts. Really defining, that narrative, because otherwise, it's already written. We know the path if I can't read by third grade. And we know that they are watching the numbers to determine proficiency rates so that they can build prisons in upstate New York and the Midwest and places like that will happily take those federal penitentiaries because the inmates in turn become a tax base for those local municipalities. So we got to arm ourselves with that knowledge, but also understand that if we're not willing to change the system, right? And I'm not going to make it about me, but someone said, well, why would you take a pay cut to go to the Department of Education? What good is me sleeping well at night on my bi-weekly pay if the children who I'm supposed to be responsible for in the system can't read? So as educators, and I applaud, you know, the passion that you said it with, and my wife's an educator. I argue all the time, we're complicit if we're going to sit here idle when we're the same system that we complain about. So as administrators, as teachers, you know, the ones who are teaching in suburban schools who reap the benefit, if you're a part of the same membership, come spend a day and walk in my shoes. So that when we come to that table and we're negotiating, maybe there is a difference in incentivizing what does it mean to work in the school that when I go home, I'm so stressed out that I can't be whole for my own children and family. Because I thought I had a heart attack at 28. And thank you, Mr. Pat, for taking over by for me. And I'll tell you what, I was living in the city at the time, and I couldn't listen to a whole song before I left school until I got home. So there was no decompression. So the question about trauma, I actually discovered it firsthand when I realized I was taking on secondary and vicarious trauma with the simple fact that you work in a high stress environment constantly. So the same pattern that my children were experiencing, I started to take that on. So I literally would get stuck in traffic going 95 to come back up Maryland Avenue, to come back in the city to give myself time to listen. So I empathize with our educators who truly aren't equipped. And this isn't of no fault of their own, because higher ed and teacher prep programs don't prepare them through a methods block or 6-week-long student-teacher experience where you just learn how to write lesson plans about content that your children are going to connect to because it's irrelevant to them. It has no bearing. So when we talk about system and things we can do now, we can start with content. We can start with providing children things that they're going to engage in. Again,
so that they're respected. So the most important thing is respect. And I feel like if you don't have identity before that, if you don't know who it is that you are, what it is that you learn, you're not going to be able to actually take hold of it and respect it enough to keep it up here in your head. So when you learn who it is that you are and start to respect yourself, it's going to make it a lot harder for you to pick up a weapon or to hurt someone else that looks like you just because you don't respect them. But if you respect yourself first, you're able to actually think before you do something crazy like that. So it eliminates a lot of the problem that we have later on down the line when we teach them early who it is that they are. They know who it is that they are. I just wanted to say that the words that we use to describe the children, we call them kids, you know, and we, not all the time, some people, but we don't think about how powerful our words are when we're describing them, when we're thinking about them, when we're wondering what it is that we can do to help our children. We first need to respect them enough to actually look at them as people. Like, we're all remarkable, we're all individuals, we all deserve respect. If we want them to respect themselves and respect each other, we have to respect them first. And we got to respect them enough to actually teach them who it is that they are. We got to care enough about them to teach them how great they are and how special they can be for themselves, for their families, for their communities, and for the entire world. But if we don't take the time to actually teach them about themselves and they don't learn it, they're going to end up killing themselves and killing each other. So this is a very serious subject that
There are a couple other folks who want to ask.
she's crying about.
Right back there.
A lot of us are crying about. I'm crying on the inside.
Can I borrow that mic?
Okay, pass it back.
Can I borrow that mic?
There you go.
Young lady back there?
Yeah, that's
I know she wanted to say something, but I just wanted, I gotta go. I had a teenager at work and I had things to do. My name is Karen Simpson. For 30 years I've been teaching kindergarten. I love teaching kindergarten. And at the end of the day, let me tell you something. Next year will be my 30th year. I've never met a baby that never wanted to learn. I taught at PS. I used to have to take my little Pontiac Grand Am and go on down to 22nd and Carter and have parent meetings because they didn't feel comfortable enough to come to me. So I said, I'll come to everybody knew. Miss Cameron coming to your house now. If you don't come to her, she's coming to you. Okay? But just think that as we talk about policy and all the things going on, I've never met a baby who didn't want to learn. Never met, I don't care how poor they were, because they don't know, the kids don't, sometimes they know as they get older, but they know that the school is a place that they want to come to. And what they need to meet them at the school is somebody who's going to say, hey, baby, how you doing? You know, oh, you got the... And that's what they want to see. I don't care if you're brown, yellow, blue, I don't care what your statistics are. I have a 12th grader who's in CP English, and I have a 12th grader who's in statistics. It's all good. It's all good. We're going to get him to college. He's going to college. You know? But just leave here, you know, I came here because I'm passionate about this work. I'm passionate about kids. That's why I choose to, people say, you should become an administrator. You've been doing this for a long time. Where my worth is in front of those children every single day.
Okay, so I have a question. So I just want to know, like, I'm Neva Brown from William Penn High School. I'm in 12th grade. And I just want to feedback on what you were saying. I just have a question, like, how do you guys enforce the law of special ed students? Like, how do you separate when you have students as special ed and regular students? Like, how's the law enforced, basically? Especially schools without money.
How is the law enforced? For me, see if I can answer your question. I understand your question. You're saying how do we enforce special ed law?
Yes.
Well, it's federal law, so if a student is identified with having a disability, it's mandated that we meet them based on what that identified disability may be.
But I'm saying, like, with the students that's mixed in, like if it's regular students and special ed students, like it would basically...
So there are different classifications. There's different classifications of special ed. So some of their classification may require them to be in the general education setting more so than in a least restricted environment or self-contained setting, depending on what their needs are. If you're talking about you feel like you're in classes that have too many special ed kids, I don't know if that's what you're...
No, I'm saying, like, you say you would book the classroom with school rewrite when you had like the 41 kids.
Oh, you mean 41 to 17? Well, there's a ratio, and that's why after the 30 count, they hired another teacher to lessen those numbers. But that was...
And I also feel like the school that can't afford that, like can't afford to separate the special ed from the regular students. How do you generate like the education levels?
They should. They have to by law. So if they're not, they're violating the law. Yeah, so if you feel that's happening, then we need to call attention to
There
that.
are inclusive classrooms where the general ed has, the special ed.
Yeah, but there should be a ratio, right? It should be proportionate to the number, because otherwise you're going to be disproportionately high where you're not going to be able to meet their individual needs. So although they should have access to what we say the general education curriculum is, there are also identified needs within that child's individual education plan that you have to meet their needs. So, but it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to call attention to. And another thing is we have too many children who are mislabeled or misidentified as special ed when they're not. You know, it's that they're experiencing trauma. It's that we sit at the table and get parents to sign off to tell them that their child is going to get something different in special ed, and they don't get anything different. So, and I think that's the other thing as schools and as school leaders and as educators, we have to be advocates for parents. So one of the things that I would always do, if we're going to tell a parent, a grandparent, a caregiver, that we're recommending special education services for your child, then it's our due diligence and responsibility to walk them through that process and not throw out a bunch of acronyms to them and a bunch of edu-speak and big words when they get to the table that it feels like a home mortgage. Or you buying a car and you're sitting there signing your life away, you don't know what you're signing your life away to. And then you're locking them into something that inherently really isn't any different. You know, so part of that process is treating every child as if they're individual and meet them where they individually are. And that's ultimately our responsibility as educators and as a system.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Beatrice Patton Dixon, Lockbridge and panel. And I want to confused because we keep talking about the studies. By now, we know the issues. We are teaching children today in the same environment and in the same way, despite STEM, that we taught them during the industrial era. Maybe if we work this process back from what are the jobs, because they are no longer those jobs, even with STEM. When you walk into Chrysler now, robots and artificial intelligence are running the Chrysler plant. So what are we preparing children for? College degrees, of course, associate degrees, of course. This is all fine. I can tell you as an educational advocate who went into and came out of that DUSEG process exactly what caused the problems, none of which was mentioned today. African American children from the city of Wilmington were put in special ed because the federal government gave the school districts extra subsidies for them being there. African American children were not put in gifted and advanced classes, and many of them were more than amply capable of being in those classes. So that was racist, because we've got to deal with this, and we've got to deal with the core issue. These issues, as we project them, are black and white. The problem is, we have sat by and let African American students be placed in the position that they're in. And now we're finding that the system that permitted that to happen is also impacting Caucasian children. So when we start talking about the underlying way to address these issues, let's address them from a system of fairness for all children. But you cannot, when we went into DUSEG, the teachers from the city of Wilmington had more advanced doctors, masters, plus degrees, classroom experience. They had the highest salaries in the entire state. They had to sit out for 3 years, not while the other teachers in the 11 districts were better qualified, but so they could get the same salaries. Not the same preparation, not the same qualifications, the same salary. We started there, and as soon as those salaries were leveled up, those African American teachers were pushed out of the system. We have a dearth of African American teachers in the system right now. You want to start doing something, and this is just common sense. Go into those high schools, find those students who are qualified and who want to become teachers, and give them free educations at Del State University and University of Delaware, and put them back in the classroom. We're not even making common sense. The governance policy, Brady White, Christina Colonial, Red Clay, and the Votech District. One African American sitting on all of those boards. Votech has an African American and a Hispanic. The point I'm making, governance has never been fair. That whole process was never fair. We are now left not with these children are being victimized by their victimization. They are being labeled, but they are not responsible for the circumstance and the condition that they are in. We have a history. Howard High School, 160-some years old. The building that sits there on Clifford Brown Walk is 90 years old. We produce doctors, lawyers, engineering chiefs, and some of the most qualified professionals in this country, bar none, who have contributed to the world culture, not just the city's culture. And we sit here and we presume that we can sit here and say these low-income African-American children from Wilmington are the problem that we're dealing with. The problem is not that, and until we stop acting as though this issue is black and white, it is not. If you permit it to happen to one group of children, it's just a matter of time before it happens to the rest of them. And that is where we are now. You have as many Caucasian children in urban areas in this state and suburban areas who are dropping out of school also. Not because these children are not equipped, not because they're not challenged. So when we start talking about what these children need, I had teachers who lived in my neighborhood, went to church with me, shopped where my parents shopped. I saw them regularly, and they considered me theirs, as this young woman in the neighborhood considers those children. And it's not an issue of black and white. Let's stop the stupidity. It's an issue of economics. If I come into this system with a lot of money, I'm going to do well because my parents are going to be looked after. I have gone into schools with parents and had principals and teachers look at them and ask them by their conduct, what are you doing here? What do you mean, what are you doing? What am I doing? I pay your salary, you don't pay mine. You are supposed to educate my child. If there is a culture vacuum, and there is a culture vacuum, in who is teaching those children, the cultural competence must be included in the curriculum, because otherwise you're telling a lie. And our children are learning in English, in history, in math, in social studies, and in science, all kinds of distruths that don't contribute to them feeling proud about who they are and therefore their ability to accomplish. So let's start with, what are we preparing them for? Because I don't know what the new jobs are. We are now in an economy where industrialization is no longer going to come back to these United States because it's cheaper other places. So what is the economy? Sure, we know it's information and it's data, and we also know it's finance. But what else is it that we prepare our children to take a step in? Let's start there, work back, see what it is that we really need to educate them about. But as it relates to the governance, we know what the deal is. 17 districts in a state this small is absurd. It's absurd. Wilmington has 1 seat on 4 districts, 1 seat on 5 districts that has a person of color from the city of Wilmington being represented. We have had no say. We consistently and constantly for the last 30-some years have had to go in to 5, 6 districts dealing with, if you include Appoquinimink, dealing with issues of concern for our children. They still have not been addressed. But now we find that the system is failing all children. So let's work on making it work for everyone and let everyone understand that as the least of these do, so eventually will the best of these do.
So yeah, actually it's 19 school districts and 24 charters organized as school districts, so it's actually, we made it a lot worse. Yeah, so, yeah, it was no accident. It was, that's my whole point. It's no accident. This was done as public policy intendedly, right? To advantage some and disadvantage others.
Exactly.
Yeah, so now we need to stop it, right? Now, on your other point, which I think is absolutely on target, so let me just leave with a little bit of a story, because it actually connects some other comments you heard about kindergarten kids, etc. So there's something called divergent thinking. Right, see, we're in an age where we are told the 21st century belongs to the creative. Right, we're told now the old industrial economy's gone, and now it's all going to be the creative genius, right, imagination, that's the premium. So there's some work that's been done, right, and we said, okay, what do we know? There's folks have a lot of creativity, but there's some folks that have a lot more creativity. So this divergent thinking is kind of like, how many ways can you think of using something? So if you said, well, how many ways could you use paper clip, right? So we go around here, I mean, we might think of 5 or 10, but there's one group that can come up with hundreds of ways to use a paper clip. And you know what that group is. Anybody have any idea what it is? They're the kids that you greet every morning. She knows exactly where they are. Right, why? Because those kids can say, well, what if I made it 300 feet tall, made out of foam rubber, and it wiggles? See, they're not crazy. They've got all these things. They are intrinsically creative, right? And so here's the dilemma, okay? We track kids with this immense creativity, much more creativity. And the more schooling they have, I'm not even going to finish the sentence. So that would have to change for all kids. right? That's not just some kids, right? It's just for all kids, right? We take the best of them, and instead of supporting it, we say, no, sit down in that chair, right? Just like Brett was saying. And they're looking around. So we do need to change the whole system, no question. Thank you very much.
I think that we'll have to officially close the program, but thank you so much for coming and for your passion and your hard work in the classrooms. Please fill out the evaluation on your seats and take materials if you have any. If you need any materials, please either write that on your evaluation or contact who you contacted to make your reservation, and we'll get those to you. But please